debunking the vulnerability myths. In the last Read With Me session, we went over myth number 1 and myth number 2. Myth number 1 being vulnerability is weakness. That is a myth. Vulnerability number 2 is I don't do vulnerability. And number 3 and number 4 are what we are about to dive into in this particular Read With Me session from this incredible book, Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. Hope you're enjoying it so far. If you're just joining us, tuning in, we have a playlist of all the previous Read With Me sessions that you can go ahead and check out. My name is Vanessa Black, and I'm so happy and grateful that you are here, and we're going to invest the next 20 minutes here together. All right. So let's talk about vulnerability myth number 3. Vulnerability is letting it all hang out. That is a myth. One line of questioning that I often get is about our let it all hang out culture. Can't there be too much vulnerability? Question mark. Isn't there such a thing as oversharing? These questions are inevitably followed by examples from celebrity culture. What about when movie star X tweeted about her husband's suicide attempt? Or what about reality TV stars who share the intimate details of their lives and their children's lives with the world? Vulnerability is based on mutuality and requires boundaries and trust. It's not oversharing. It's not purging. It's not indiscriminate disclosure. And it's not celebrity-style social media information dumps. Vulnerability is about sharing our feelings and our experiences with people who have earned the right to hear them. Being vulnerable and open is mutual and an integral part of the trust building process. We can't always have guarantees in place before we risk sharing. However, we don't bare our souls the first time we meet someone. We don't lead with, "Hi, my name is Brené, and here's my darkest struggle." That's not vulnerability. That may be desperation or woundedness or even attention seeking, but it's not vulnerability. Why? Because sharing appropriately with boundaries means sharing with people with whom we've developed relationships that can bear the weight of our story. Like that. The result of this mutually respectful vulnerability is increased connection, trust, and engagement. Vulnerability without boundaries leads to disconnection, distrust, and disengagement. Strong. In fact, as we'll explore it in chapter 4, letting it all hang out or boundaryless disclosure is one way we protect ourselves from real vulnerability. And the TMI, too much information issue, is not even a case of too much vulnerability. Vulnerability is bankrupt on its own terms when people move from being vulnerable to using vulnerability to deal with unmet needs, get attention, or engage in the shock and awe behaviors that are so commonplace in today's culture. To more effectively dispel the myth that vulnerability is a secret, sharing free for all, let's examine the issue of trust. Very interesting. How do I know if I can trust someone enough to be vulnerable? I'll only be vulnerable with someone if I'm sure they won't turn on me. How can you tell who's got your back? How do we build trust with people? The good news is that the answer to these questions emerge from the data. The bad news is that it's a chicken or the egg issue. We need to feel trust to be vulnerable, and we need to be vulnerable in order to trust. I'm going to repeat that again. We need to feel trust to be vulnerable, and we need to be vulnerable in order to trust. There is no trust test, no scoring system, no green light that tells us that it's safe to let ourselves be seen. The research participants described trust as a slow building, layered process that happens over time. In our family, we refer to trust as the marble jar. In the middle of third grade, Ellen had her first experience with betrayal. In many elementary school settings, third grade is a big move. Students are no longer clustered with the K2 crowd. They're now navigating through grade 3 to 5 group. During recess, she had confided in a friend from her class about a funny, slightly embarrassing thing that had happened to her earlier in the day. By lunchtime, all of the girls in her peer group knew her secret and were giving her a hard time. It was an important lesson, but also a painful one, because up to that point, she had never considered the possibility that someone would do that. When she came home, she burst into tears and told me that she was never going to tell anyone anything. Her feelings were so hurt. Listening, I felt my heart aching for her. To make matters worse, Ellen told me that the girls were still laughing at her when they returned to the classroom. So much that her teacher separated them and took marbles out of the marble jar. Ellen's teacher had a large, clear glass vase that she and the kids referred to as the marble jar. She kept a bag of colored marbles next to the jar, and whenever the class was collectively making good choices, she would throw some marbles into the jar. Whenever the class was acting out, breaking rules or not listening, the teacher would take marbles out of the jar. If and when the marbles made it to the top of the jar, the students would be rewarded with a celebration party. As much as I wanted to pull Ellen close and whisper, "Not sharing with those girls is a great idea. That way they'll never hurt you again," I put my fears and anger aside and started trying to figure out how to talk to her about trust and connection. As I was searching for the right way to translate my own experiences of trust and what I was learning about trust from the research, I thought, the marble jar. Perfect. I told Ellen to think about her friendships as marble jars. Whenever someone supports you or is kind to you or sticks up for you or honors what you share with them as private, you put marbles in a jar. When people are mean or disrespectful or share your secrets, marbles come out. When I asked her if it made sense, she nodded her head with excitement and said, "I've got marble jar friends. I've got marble jar friends." When I asked her to tell me about it, she described 4 friends whom she could always count on, who knew some of her secrets and would never tell, and who told her some of their secrets too. She said, "These are the friends who asked me to sit with them, even if they've been asked to sit at the popular kids' table." It was such a great moment for both of us. When I asked her how her marble jar friends became marble jar friends, she thought about it for a minute and replied, "I'm not sure. How did your marble jar friends get their marbles?" After thinking about it for a while, we both started blurting out our answers. Some of hers were, "They keep our secrets. They tell us their secrets, and they remember my birthday. They know who Oma and Opa are. They always make sure I'm included in fun things. They know when I'm sad and ask me why. When I miss school because I'm sick, they ask their moms to call to check on me." And mine? Exactly the same. Except for me, Oma and Opa are Deanne and David, my mom and stepdad. When my mom comes to Ellen or Charlie's events, it's a great feeling to hear one of my friends say, "Hey, Deanne, good to see you." I always think, she remembered my mom's name. She cares. She's paying attention. Trust is built one marble at a time. The chicken or the egg dilemma comes into play when we think about the investment and leap that people in relationship have to make before the building process ever begins. The teacher didn't say, "I'm not buying a jar of marbles until I know that the class can collectively make good choices." The jar was there on the first day of school. In fact, by the end of the first day, she had already filled the bottom with a layer of marbles. The kids didn't say, "We're not going to make good choices because we don't believe you'll put marbles in the jar." They worked hard and enthusiastically engaged with the marble jar idea based on their teacher's word. One of my favorite scholars in the field of relationship is John Gottman. He's considered the country's foremost couples researcher because of the power and accessibility of his pioneering work on how we connect and build relationships. His book, The Science of Trust, Emotional Atonement, Attunement for Couples is an insightful and wise book on the anatomy and trust and trust building. In an article on the University of California, Berkeley's Greater Good website, Gottman describes trust building with our partners in a manner totally consistent with what I found in my research and what Ellen and I call the marble jar. What I found through research is that trust is built in very small moments, which I call sliding door moments, after the movie Sliding Doors. In any interaction, there is a possibility of connecting with your partner or turning away from your partner. Let me give you an example of that from my own relationship. One night, I really wanted to finish a mystery novel. I thought I knew who the killer was, but I was anxious to find out. At one point in the night, I put the novel on my bedside and walked into the bathroom. As I passed the mirror, I saw my wife's face in the reflection, and she looked sad, brushing her hair. There was a sliding door moment. I had a choice. I could sneak out of the bathroom and think, I don't want to deal with her sadness tonight. I want to read my novel. But instead, because I'm a sensitive researcher of relationships, I decided to go into the bathroom. I took the brush from her hair and asked, "What's the matter, baby?" And she told me why she was sad. Now, at that moment, I was building trust. I was there for her. I was connecting with her rather than choosing to think only about what I wanted. These are the moments we've discovered that build trust. One such moment is not that important, but if you're always choosing to turn away, then trust erodes in a relationship, very gradually, very slowly. When we think about betrayal in terms of the marble jar metaphor, most of us think of someone we trust doing something so terrible that it forces us to grab the jar and dump out every single marble. What's the worst betrayal of trust you can think of? He sleeps with my best friend. She lies about where the money went. She chooses someone over me. Someone uses my vulnerability against me. An act of emotional treason that causes most of us to slam the entire jar to the ground rather than just dumping the marbles. All terrible betrayals, definitely, but there is a particular sort of betrayal that is more insidious and equally corrosive to trust. In fact, this betrayal usually happens long before the other ones. I'm talking about the betrayal of disengagement, of not caring, of letting the connection go, of not being willing to devote time and effort to the relationship. The word betrayal evokes experiences of cheating, lying, breaking a confidence, failing to defend us to someone else who is gossiping about us, and not choosing us over other people. These behaviors are certainly betrayals, but they're not the only form of betrayal. If I had to choose the form of betrayal that emerged most frequently from my research and that was the most dangerous in terms of corroding the trust connection, I would say disengagement. When the people we love or with whom we have a deep connection stop caring, stop paying attention, stop investing, and stop fighting for the relationship, trust begins to slip away and hurt starts seeping in. Disengagement triggers shame and our greatest fears. The fears of being abandoned, unworthy, and unlovable. What can make this covert betrayal so much more dangerous than something like a lie or an affair is that we can't point to the source of our pain. There's no event, no obvious evidence of brokenness. It can feel crazy making. We may tell a disengaged partner, "You don't seem to care anymore." But without evidence of this, the response is, "I'm home from work every night by 6 p.m. I tuck in the kids. I'm taking the boys to Little League. What do you want from me?" Or at work, we think, "Why am I not getting feedback? Tell me you love it. Tell me it sucks. Just tell me something so I know you remember that I work here." With children, actions speak louder than words. When we stop requesting invitations into their lives by asking about their day, asking them to tell us about their favorite songs, wondering how their friends are doing, then children feel pain and fear and not relief, despite how our teenagers may act, because they can't articulate how they feel about our disengagement when we stop making an effort with them. They show us by acting out, thinking this will get their attention. Like trust, most experiences of betrayal happen slowly, one marble at a time. In fact, the overt or big betrayals that I mentioned before are more likely to happen after a period of disengagement and slowly eroding trust. What I've learned about trust professionally and what I've lived personally boils down to this. Trust is a product of vulnerability that grows over time and requires work, attention, and full engagement. Trust isn't a grand gesture, it's a growing marble collection. Myth number 4, we can go it alone. Going it alone is a value we hold in high esteem in our culture. Ironically, even when it comes to cultivating connection, I get the appeal. I have that rugged individualism in my DNA. In fact, one of my favorite breakup kick ass, no one can hurt me songs is Whitesnake's Here I Go Again. If you're a person of a certain age, I'd put money down that you've rolled down the window and defiantly sung, and here I go again on my own. Like a drifter, I was born to walk alone. If Whitesnake isn't your cup of tea, there are bootstrapping anthems in every imaginable genre. In reality, walking alone can feel miserable and depressing, but we admire the strength it conveys. And going it alone, it revered in our culture. Well, as much as I love the idea of walking alone down a lonely street of dreams, the vulnerability journey is not the kind of journey we can make alone. We need support. We need folks who will let us try on new ways of being without judging us. We need a hand to pull us up off the ground when we get kicked down in the arena. And if we live a courageous life, that will happen. Across the course of my research, participants were very clear about their need for support, encouragement, and sometimes professional help as they re-engage with vulnerability and their emotional lives. Most of us are good at giving help, but when it comes to vulnerability, we need to ask for help too. The gifts of imperfection, I write, quote, until we can receive with an open heart, we are never really giving with an open heart. When we attach judgment to receiving help, we knowingly or unknowingly attach judgment to giving help. We all need help. I know I couldn't have done it without reinforcements that included my husband, Steve, a great therapist, a stack of books a mile high, and friends and family members who are on a similar journey. Vulnerability begets vulnerability. Courage is contagious. There's actually some very persuasive leadership research that supports the idea that asking for support is critical and that vulnerability and courage are contagious. In a 2011 Harvard Business Review article, Peter and Richard use a series of metaphors to explore how leaders spark and sustain change. One of the metaphors is a snowball. The snowball starts rolling when a leader is willing to be vulnerable with his or her subordinates. Their research shows that this act of vulnerability is predictably perceived as courageous by team members and inspires others to follow suit. Supporting the metaphor of the snowball is a story of Clinton, the managing director of a large German corporation who realized that his directive leadership style was preventing senior managers from taking initiative. The researchers explain he could have worked in private to change his behavior, but instead he stood up at an annual meeting of his top 60 managers, acknowledged his failings, and outlined both his personal and organizational roles. He admitted that he didn't have all of the answers and asked his team for help leading the company. Having studied the transformation that followed this event, the researchers report that Clinton's effectiveness surged. His team flourished. There were increases in initiative and innovation, and his organization went on to outperform much larger competitors. Similar to the story above, my greatest personal and professional transformations happened when I started asking hard questions about how my fear of being vulnerable was holding me back, and when I found the courage to share my struggles and ask for help. After running from vulnerability, I found that learning how to lean into discomfort of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure was a painful process. I did believe that I could opt out of feeling vulnerable. So when it happened, when the phone rang with unimaginable news, or when I was scared, or when I loved so fiercely that rather than feeling gratitude and joy, I can only prepare for loss, I controlled things. I managed situations and micromanaged the people around me. I performed until there was no energy left to feel. I made what was uncertain certain, no matter what the cost. I stayed so busy that the truth of my hurting and my fear could never catch up. I looked brave on the outside and felt scared on the inside. Slowly, I learned that this shield was too heavy to lug around and that the only thing it really did was keep me from knowing myself and letting myself be known. The shield required that I stay small and quiet behind it so as not to draw attention to my imperfections and vulnerabilities. It was exhausting. I remember a very tender moment from that year when Steve and I were lying on the floor watching Ellen do a series of crazy arm flinging and knee slapping dances and tumbles. I looked at Steve and said, "Isn't it funny how I just love her that much more for being so vulnerable and uninhibited and goofy? I could never do that. Can you imagine knowing that you're loved like that?" Steve looked at me and said, "I love you exactly like that." Honestly, as someone who rarely risks vulnerability and always steered clear of silly or goofy, it never dawned on me that adults could love each other like that I could be loved for my vulnerabilities, not despite them. All of the love and support I received, especially from Steve and Diana, my therapist allowed me to slowly begin to take more risk, to show up at work and at home in new ways. I took more chances and tried new things like storytelling. I learned how to set new boundaries and say no, even when I was terrified that I was going to piss off a friend or squander a professional opportunity that I regret. So far, I haven't regretted a single no. Going back to Roosevelt's man in the arena speech, I also learned that the people who love me, the people I really depend on, were never the critics who were pointing at me while I stumbled. They weren't in the bleachers at all. They were with me in the arena, fighting for me and with me. Nothing has transformed my life more than realizing that it's a waste of time to evaluate my worthiness by weighing the reaction of the people in the stands. The people who love me and will be there regardless of the outcome are within arm's reach. This realization changed everything. That's the wife and mother and friend that I now strive to be. I want our home to be a place where we can be our bravest selves and our most fearful selves, where we practice difficult conversations and share our shaming moments from school and work. I want to look at Steve and my kids and say, "I'm with you in the arena. And when we fail together while daring greatly." We simply can't learn to be more vulnerable and courageous on our own. Sometimes our first and greatest dare is asking for support. And that concludes chapter 2, debunking the myths of vulnerability. What an awesome, awesome chapter. Really deep, really awesome information, data, examples, insight of what vulnerability is, what vulnerability really isn't, and really, really awesome information. So I hope you enjoyed it. Would love to know your thoughts on it. And chapter 3 is called Understanding and Combating Shame, aka Gremlin Ninja Warrior Training. That's going to be in the next Read With Me session, chapter 3, Understanding and Combating Shame. Definitely excited for that one to understand what that is. Super excited to hear from you, your thoughts, your feedback, and hope you're enjoying this book so far. Hope you're getting some great things out of it. You can go ahead and share this with somebody that you feel called to share this with, and we'll see you in the next Read With Me session. Make sure to subscribe if you want to get notified. We post Read With Me sessions on a weekly basis, Monday through Friday, on the books that we're reading. We're reading 2 books every single month, one on personal freedom, one on financial freedom. This is our featured personal freedom book of the month, Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. She's awesome on Instagram. Go check her out. Get the book if you haven't. It's really awesome to be able to read physically and listen in at the same time. Isabel, my love, my partner in life and business, is currently reading the Financial Freedom Book of the Month, which is called The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy. Okay. An incredible book. Go check it out in the playlist. And we'll see you soon. All right. Take care and have a beautiful rest of your day.